Welcome to the Oh So Spurs podcast. We are back with a finance special. There are rumours circulating that Tottenham have new sponsorship deals inbound in the form of mainly a stadium sponsor, but there's also talk that internal investment may be coming inside the club as well that's funding our current increases in transfer activity. Well, we're going to look under the hood and figure out what a stadium sponsor would look like. Are they as important as shirt sponsors? Does it move the needle for us? And is it likely that Spurs are investing internally? Has something changed? And to help me with it all is Nick, working in corporate finance. How are you, Nick?
I'm well, Jim. How are you?
I'm doing very well, thanks. Yes, I'm doing good. And we have wonderful Ben back, who you may have heard on many shows like The Fighting Cock, who also works in finance. How are you, Ben?
Yeah, very good, thank you.
Good. It's great to have you guys on. Shall we start with the stadium sponsor topic? Because there's talk of certain investments from certain regions coming into Spurs in the large form, and people have put two and two together and said, that likely means Spurs are going to get loads more money. And that's probably correlating with big bids for footballers. So should we start with how much would a stadium sponsor typically be worth to us if we're going by the data available in the public today and comparing with other clubs? And does it move the needle? Do you want to go, Ben?
I've been doing a bit of digging on this one because, as you say, there's a lot of rumours swirling around in terms of there maybe being a bit of a spending spree this summer, and whether that could be fueled by some form of investment or by a stadium sponsorship. I think somebody on Twitter or X posted that it's a combination of both. TBC on that front. So I've sort of been comparing to some other clubs that have had long-term stadium sponsorship deals just to see how much validity there is in the theory that it would drive a spending spree for us this summer. And really the outcome is that it's actually quite a small proportion of your annual income, a stadium sponsorship deal. So they sound like big deals on paper because they're all 10, 15-year deals. All of these, it's very rare you get one less than 10 years. So you'll be talking over 100 million generally for these deals. When you break that down per year, they're actually not worth all that much money. The highest one out there in terms of figures is Leverkusen, surprisingly, because they're owned by a big pharmaceuticals company that founded them back in, I think it was 120 odd years ago, and their stadium sponsorship is worth about £25 million per year. That's the highest one out there currently in football. You've got a few hybrid deals that will be higher. People like Etihad with Man City will bundle it all up, so they'll do it with your Spurs shirt sponsorship, your stadium, your training ground, your women's team, everything, all inclusive package, and they will then give you a lot more money per year. And the same with Barcelona and Spotify. They do the stadium, they do shirts and all sorts. But typically, a lot of these deals, the Barcelona line item, I think, is around 16 million per year it's worth to them. But the vast majority are below 10 million a year. So Arsenal's, depending on the source, you're talking anything between 4 million and 7 million a year for the Emirates, for the pure stadium. A lot of the ones in the Premier League, you're not talking huge money figures for the stadium sponsorship. So realistically, for Tottenham, you'd probably be talking something like maybe 15 million, upwards, maybe 20 million at the really high end. But I would have thought it's not going to be much more than that. So it helps. Every little helps. You get that 15 million extra a year in. Of course, that's a player at 50 million amortized over 5 years plus 100 grand a week. So, it's nice, but it's not going to fund you a 200 million pound spending spree by itself. For that, you're probably looking more towards your other types of sponsorship. So I think we've probably all seen the news this week about the Puma deal that Man City have made. So the kit manufacturing deals are quite big. They can be 70 million a year, 80 million a year. I think Man City's is rumored to be 100 million every year. So that obviously dwarfs the 10, 15, 20 million we might make from a stadium sponsorship. And then things like the front of shirt sponsor, your sleeve sponsor, like we get 10 million a year from having the little octopus, the little Kraken octopus on our sleeves. Yeah. That's 2/3 of the way towards probably what you get from a stadium sponsor. Really, it's not really a big needle mover, and it's probably not the source of funds for a huge spending spree. It's just a bit of a helpful, additional income. And I think that probably explains why, if you look across the Premier League, there's not many stadium sponsors. I've always sort of thought, why don't we do it? But actually, when you look across the board, Man City, Arsenal, you got Brighton, Brentford, that might be another one out there floating around. There's not many, basically. Man United don't, Liverpool don't, even Newcastle don't. And you would think that's quite an open goal to sponsor the stadium and chuck another 20 million a year. But even they thought it's not really worth it.
Do you agree, Nick? Anything to add on that one?
Yeah, I mean, no, I completely agree with what Ben said. I think it just correlates with a lot of what we've looked at as well. There is, I mean, Tottenham are very good at making money, and we've said that on previous podcasts as well. I do wonder whether the discussion around stadium sponsorship and people getting excited in the media is anything to do with the fact that we've got quite a significant debt on the stadium. So I think it's been well reported that we borrowed a lot of money in order to build the stadium. So total debts of the stadium are 851 million. The good news is that that's over a long period of time. So it's over like an average weighted life of about 18 years with no repayments until around sort of main repayments around 2051. And an average interest rate of 3.16. So, I mean, once without doing too much maths, but once you start looking at the total figure and timesing that by the interest rate that we have, roughly speaking, the sort of interest that we pay for the debt on the stadium is anywhere between 25 and 30 million a year. And it's probably not a coincidence that a lot of the stories that we hear are always floating around, oh, well, Spurs have managed to find this fantastic deal with X company that's going to pay them £25 million a year.
So we touched on it there, Ben, earlier as well. So we've kind of established then that the stadium deals aren't as important as perhaps they're perceived to be. Maybe it's the gravitas of being associated to, being the kind of center point of the media's cameras when they're looking at a game that's building up, and all the names in light of the the Nike Bowl or whatever it is, or the Nike Arena, whatever it's going to be, that we get a bit carried away, and you think, well, that scale of that versus surely that's got to be worth more than that Nike tick on the shirt, but it's not. And the numbers are there to show that. But we are in a situation, though, guys, where our contract with Nike doesn't run out to 2032, so we've got a way to go until we could see a £100 million a season sponsorship deal like City, right?
I've seen a bit of grumbling about that because, as you say, we're locked in on the long term. These deals generally are fairly long term. The lowest you see really is sort of 4 or 5 years normally. But yeah, we're locked in at 40 million a year, I think. That's now sort of fallen behind. Obviously, we're well behind Man City, but we're also behind a few of our rivals. So Arsenal, I think, are now renewed at 50 million a year with Emirates. That's one of those sort of combination deals where they get the stadium, they get the women's kit, they get the men's kit. Liverpool with Standard Chartered get 50 million a year. I think you got PSG, Real Madrid, you would expect them to be higher, but they're up at sort of 60 million plus. So yeah, and then Man City now with 100 million a year, where you really, I think, get the extra whack. And Man City, we know they do. They push the limits with this stuff. But there was one story while I was researching that Man City, that 2011, they got a sponsorship deal in place for the stadium and for the kits. So they got the men's kit, the women's kit, everything else, and the training ground as well. And it was worth 35 million a year. And there was a lot of, you probably remember at the time, there was a lot of pushback, and there was a lot of sort of people, regulatory bodies looking at it saying they can't justify 35 million a year. That only came out because UEFA started looking at their finances, and they had to list how much they were getting. It turns out 2 years later, they had very sort of behind closed doors bumped this up to 67.5 million per year. So they had nearly doubled it in the space of 2 years with no real justification. And then since then, they've been giving themselves nearly 70 million a year to sponsor the stadium and the shirts. Wow. And if you're getting that every year versus our 40 million plus nothing for the stadium, it very soon adds up to, over 10 years, you're talking extra 300 million pounds in revenue. So yeah, that's really where you can make the big gains, is if you've got maybe a state-owned owner or a really rich owner who's willing to sponsor across the board and wants to do a big sort of package deal, so their name's on plastered over everything, basically.
And there is just a natural part of this, right, where our deal was in 2017. It was pre a hyperinflation is extreme, and a period of a lot of inflation. So that's still worth 30 million a season I believe it is. The Nike deal as an example. So if you factor that into inflation, it goes to show it was a good deal for the time, but just naturally time changes, and the clubs will always feel left behind who sign the long-term deals when a new club further down in the future goes and gets another one, because inflation typically only goes one way at the moment. When we go to 2032, I'm sure, and sign a new deal, someone will go, whoa, Spurs have got the 110 million a season deal now. And then someone's going, well, why did we sign one for 90 when Spurs can get 110? But it's never going to be equal, because they don't all reset on the same year for all
And
these
it's still
clubs.
pretty good money overall because we've got
Yeah.
the Nike, as you say, 30 million a year. AIA give us 40 million a year. Kraken give us 10 million a year. So, it does all add up. You're talking, we're closing in on 100 million for sponsorships just around the kits and the training kits and things. So it's still pretty good money. It's not as high as some of our rivals in the Premier League. Yeah, even leaving Man City aside, you got Liverpool and people like that still earning 130 million a year from those elements. But it's still, it's good money, even though it's not top of the line money right now.
Go on, Nick.
Yeah. I mean, so I completely agree again with what Ben's saying. I think the clubs that Ben's listed are clubs that have really managed to grow their brand and very successfully over a period of time. There are various reasons for that, and especially the exposure in Europe, I think, has helped out. I mean, if we look, I mean, there is one thing, I mean, without a doubt, I mean, lots of listeners will be saying, yeah, but we're leaving money on the table. There is 15 to 25 to 30 million that maybe we could generate from this. That's very true. All I would say is that I think that there may be a reason that why we haven't rushed into this stadium sponsorship deal. The first thing is, just to reinforce Ben's point, is that there is an inherent risk of doing this in that if we sign up to something now that is, say, a 20 million year deal, it might feel really good in the moment. But what if we get part of the way through that deal, say 10 years down the track, and actually it doesn't seem like really good value for money anymore, a little bit like the kit sponsor. So that's one thing. The second thing I think, and we don't know this because we're not sat around a board table, we've got no knowledge whether these discussions happen, but it's plausible that one of the things that the club wanted to do was to actually grow the brand a little bit through some of the third party events that we do. So things like, boxing, F1, NFL, when Beyonce comes to town, all of those things have helped to increase the popularity increase the brand. We're more well known. It's called the Tottenham Hotspurs Stadium, wherever we are. So I think those incremental things there can have a significant benefit overall and may actually increase the opportunity that we have, because if whoever comes in, whoever it might be, say it's Disney or something like that, Disney have got the opportunity to say, well, actually, we're not just representing a football club to a Premier League audience. We're representing it to American sports. We're representing it to the entertainment industry, to the motor car industry. Potentially, what we could see in the future is that when there is a sponsorship deal, that we get the benefit of all these additional events at the stadium that really do improve the overall commercial picture.
That's hard to measure and quantify in numbers, isn't it? For all we know, someone could figure that out. It has been worth more to us than an average sponsorship deal of a club our size. We don't know, but I think it'd be fair to, if you do a bit of assuming, I don't like assuming because it makes an ass of you and me if you spell it out like that, but you wouldn't imagine there's going to be a massive variance between taking the money and the benefits of having used it to elevate our own brand on these big occasions, like you mentioned, Nick. But guys, go on, sorry, Nick.
No, absolutely. I mean, if we just kind of bring it into context, let's call it 25 million that we get per season for this. Now, I'm a little bit boring. I think what I would look to do is to say, right, actually, Tottenham have got to pay off interest every single year for their stadium. So the sponsorship goes towards paying off the interest payments. We retain the amount that we would have spent, and then we could utilise that most likely on player investment as a combination between wages and transfer fees. And again, people might be saying, yeah, but we could buy X player or Y player. But, if we just give it a little bit of real life context, 25 million a year is roughly 20% of all of our gate receipts last season. It's broadly in line with what we make through non-football events at the stadium. It's just below what we made in terms of Europa League prize money. In real purchasing terms, Ben illustrated it nicely there. Let's say, that 25 million, it's roughly speaking, it could be a player that we buy for £75 million on 200k a week. It's definitely not going to facilitate us going out and spending 250k. The things that we already do is what helps us to achieve that.
So what we're saying is, clearly, I guess, even though I don't see a world in which you start spending money before you've got it, especially in a risk-adverse, sustainable club model that we typically, I wouldn't say risk-adverse in all senses, but you know what I mean? Financially, we tend to plan ahead. I can't imagine us going, well, hopefully we might get this deal over the line. Let's go spend the money now. But if it is the case that those two things are connected, let's just say they are for the sake of it, it is possible then that based on an average stadium size deal, let's just say we've got a £20 million a year deal at the higher end, which are Ben's numbers there. That would be when you amortize a player. You've got to factor wages in as well here. So not just the transfer fee, you are, like you're saying, talking, say, a 60, 70 million pound player on 200 grand a week. So it is possible that would move the needle to get, go from spending 120 million a season on transfers to 180. You could maybe see a world then, guys, that could be the case?
It would boost your budget. Yeah, it wouldn't lead to an extra 300 million spend in a summer alone, as some of the theories were thrown around. But it would give you some additional wiggle room, just like Nick said, all of the commercial activities, all the stadium events, they all help just to give you that that extra bit of spending power. So yeah, it would certainly help. It just isn't a huge needle mover. It's not something that would mean suddenly they can go out and spend 300. And there's been some theories that you could front load these deals, but that's not really typical. So you're not going to get the 200 million up front for a 10-year deal. You'll get 15, 20 million a season, and that's pretty much it.
Yeah, I'd say is why would you want it up front as well? You could say, well, it's brilliant. We go and invest now, but you can only use money once. Once you've spent it once, it doesn't come back to you. So if we spend it this season on opportunities, and it might be the right year to do it, I don't know. We can't predict the future. All I would say is on that basis, if anyone says we should go ahead and do it, we're going to earn more money from the Champions League this season, being our participation in the Champions League, than we would get from any stadium sponsorship deal.
Well, there you go. So stadium sponsorship deals help, but they're not crucial. Is that our summary, guys? They might buy you one kudos, but they're not going to buy you, overhaul your whole ability to spend in the market.
Exactly, and that assumes we're top end as well. So just to throw in there, if you get an average one, it doesn't even buy you a kudos probably, but top end, it would do.
Is there a possibility though, and we're going slightly left field or something we didn't put in our agenda for this one, but do you think Spurs could be looking at doing a deal which says, I will sell you a portion of the club, a minority sale, and include the stadium naming rights as a part of that in one deal to kind of elevate the value of a buyout of some sense or an investment? Do you think that's a possibility? Yeah,
I think so. I think it's not. I don't know whether you would sort of expect that to be the model of any sort of entrant of a new buyer, but it's possible that would be a carrot that they've left that open. There was sort of, I think we might have covered it on a previous pod at some point, but there was 3 potential theories as to why they might not have done it yet. One was that brand awareness of Tottenham. One was that they were leaving it open for a new buyer, and one was that they were just overvaluing it and couldn't find a sponsor. So that second one is possible, that they're sort of thinking this is a carrot. If you've got Qatar Airways, whoever it may be, who wants to buy the club, they would see that as an extra thing that they can then add some more revenue into the club. They can add the spending power. They can increase their own brand awareness at the same time as doing their sports washing stuff. So yeah, it's certainly a possibility, I would say.
Well, next topic we had, though, is internal investment. What forms can they come in, and do we think that's happening? That's another theory people have as to why we seem to be showing so much proactivity to spend, larger fees than we have in previous windows. Do you guys see any evidence of that, or any signals that might be happening?
So I think it's perfectly plausible. Again, ENIC have shown in the past that they're happy to do a capital injection through a share rights issue. I think I've said before, Jim, that in my personal opinion, I think if you are a fan of a football club, then this is the kind of investment that you would really want, because it puts all of the on the owner to make sure that they can back up what they're doing, because they're effectively what they're doing by making more cash available and increasing the share in the company. They want to get something back for that. So there has to be something in them and incentivize them to do it, so they work harder for it. I think that's the most likely option, given what we've seen ENIC do in the past. And I would imagine that it's not only that, but probably it helps ENIC a little bit more. Now, maybe not so good for other shareholders, because their absolute share then decreases as a result, but the other shareholders outside of ENIC are relatively minor in terms of the grand scheme of things and don't have a controlling say in the company. So it'll help ENIC again, because as the value of the company increases, their share of that increase goes up in line with that. The other option is, and I think this is more unlikely, is what some other owners do, but you could give the club an interest-free loan. We know that by and large, Daniel Levy is, while he's a wealthy man, he's probably not wealthy enough to put in, 100 million into Tottenham as an interest-free loan. And certainly I think the Lewis Trust is unlikely to do that based on their previous activity and ownership model that they've had. The other thing is sort of shareholder loans, which again we could get into, but what we would expect to see as a result of that is we'd see an update on Companies House that person X now has a controlling interest in the club as a result of buying out, say, the Lewis Family Trust shares or Daniel Levy's shares. So again, and we haven't seen that. Like, there's been no announcement. As we talked today, there's been nothing that we've seen at Companies House that's registered a new director or owner of the company. So I think if it's anything that's happened, it's more likely that it's going to be the former that we spoke about, that there'd be some sort of a capital injection through a shares issue.
I think that's the quite interesting bit, because all the reporting going into the summer and a bit of our own, analysis when we're talking about it was that we haven't got a PSR issue, we know that, but we potentially had a bit of a cash flow headache coming into the summer, and that was sort of backed up by some of the reporting that was coming out. So we covered there's some ways around that in terms of credit facility, or as you say, owner loans or capital injections. So there's always options, or just really structuring any deals you do this summer so your cash doesn't go out the door quite yet. So there was always options, but to then go in for maybe players that are sort of almost a luxury, like you could argue maybe Gibbs-White isn't a luxury, but if it's a release clause and a lot of that money needs to go up front, not all of it, but some of the reports coming out are saying half of it maybe was due up front, you obviously need quite a chunk of cash sitting there to do that. So when you then go through we didn't expect to have loads of cash this summer to spend, where's that coming from? That does lead you towards the sort of potentially a capital injection, or maybe the credit facility. But I would be surprised if you would eat up most of a £50 million credit facility to buy Gibbs-White, if you know what I mean. I think they would probably have leaned towards more structured deals. So it does open up a bit more of a sort of a bit more weight behind the theory that from somewhere they've got cash. And as you say, we probably would have heard more noise if a buyer was already in place. So it sort of does nudge you towards the theory that they've maybe done another capital injection.
Yeah. I agree with that. I mean, the 50 million facility that Ben spoke about, again, is an interesting one, because that's something that we negotiated the renewal of quite recently with HSBC. And, it's not a huge amount to dip into. And it seems unlikely we would do that when we've got roughly 79 million, in cash that's not yet utilised. Well, it may have been utilised over the course of the last 12 months, but that's the last snapshot that we've seen of our accounts, which is, again, significantly higher than any other Premier League club. So it seems highly unlikely that they would want to use up all that cash and then go into an overdraft facility in order to support the purchases of like one or two players. It's so unlike our ownership model to do that sort of thing. And it's the opposite of what they've publicly said in terms of wanting to raise extra capital as well.
That's the other conclusion, I guess, as well, isn't it? Is that the cash flow position wasn't as tight as maybe some people are reporting. I mean, we always assumed Matt Law was being slightly alarmist when he was telling people it's sell to buy and that sort of thing. But yeah, I think that's the other thing, is you can't really tell exactly what the cash position is, because although we knew a lot had to go out of the door, we did have a chunk sitting there. We know some's come in from the prize money from the Europa League. So we've had a lot of events, we've had a lot of big home games. So the cash position might be okay. It might be better than we think going into the summer as well. So there's a number of possible explanations for it. It may not necessarily be that any new money's come in. We might just be spending what we can spend.
Yeah, and that's it. We don't even know how the Kudos deal was structured, as an example. It could have been 5 million up front or all 50 million. We'd be completely guessing at this point, right? I'm sure there's a healthy medium there. So yeah, maybe it is just a sense as well of staying in the Champions League is worth a lot of money. We don't operate at a level where we're really redlining it, and risking going under. We operate at a model which seems, we've done the numbers for Unique. If you look at total wages and amortization, gross spend and net spend, if you use amortization as a figure, Spurs spend less than their big six rivals as a percentage of revenue. But if you use gross spend and net spend, they are within line as the likes of Liverpool and Arsenal, as an example. Maybe we just decided that staying in the Champions League is worth a lot of money to us. Now's the right time to increase spend accordingly a bit. Maybe there's some capital injection coming in, but not as big and as exciting as a lot of people expect it to be. And maybe there's some confidence with that new commercial team we've just brought in. Remember, we've just seen that they've come from Man United to drive up commercial revenues. Maybe there's some feeling and optimism that it won't just be one big stadium deal. There might be smaller partnerships we're building on. And even a £10 million a season deal, like you say, could be a £50 million a year, £50 million transfer fee for an over amortized on one player. So
that Champions League thing's a good point as well. People don't typically love to hear it, but getting back into being Champions League regulars is really important for us, because that unlocks bigger sponsorship deals, that unlocks the next level of players, and it gives you that steady elevated income every year on top of the stadium and the events and everything else. So really that should be our aim now, is of course go for the trophies at the same time, go for an FA Cup or a Carabao, whatever we can do. Make sure we're trying to hit that top 5 every season. Top 4 looks tricky. There's some good teams that are strengthening. But beneath that, you got your Newcastles, your Man United, your Villas. That fifth spot really is very doable if you can put together a consistent Premier League season. So that should be our aim now, is to get in the Champions League, 4 out of every 5 seasons, ideally every season. And then you really build that extra sort of spending power.
Well, guys, I think it's been a really interesting chat. Any final comments before we wrap up? Any final points that you feel I'm missing off?
No, I mean, in terms of income, we've covered some really good things. My call out would be, I still think that we're going to sell quite a lot of players that are around the fringes. The makeup of the squad at the moment, with the number of foreign registered players we've got, is a good indicator of players that we've either got to let leave on loan or sell. But I think that will help to generate some additional cash as well. So keep your eyes on that one.
Mine would be that no amount of money is worth a stadium being called the Hill Dickinson Stadium, like Everton's is going to be. It's just leave the stadium sponsorship and forget your money.
Yeah, the Carlisle Stadium.
As a comparison on that, the Everton Stadium's a great shout, because there are. So when they were building their stadium, the interest rate that they had on some of their loans was around 10.5%. And there is a different interest rate when you're under construction than when you have something built. But if you compare that to the interest rate that we have for our stadium of 3.16, we're in an environment where currently today base rate is 4.25. It's way under the it's way under that. It's way under the SONIA curve. And so we're far better off on keeping that lending there. And it means that we're not desperate to go out and get a sponsorship deal that might compromise our brand a little bit, that has to pay for the borrowing that we've taken to build the stadium.
Well, thank you, gents. We've got some more exciting episodes coming around the finance. If you find finance exciting like us, pretty sure that's not everyone's cup of tea, but I love it. So, yeah, we're going to be diving a bit deeper into the wages as well around the club, because there's some interesting bits there, isn't there, Nick, that we wanted to highlight, particularly around the likelihood that our wage to revenue numbers could well be going upwards quite significantly in the next report, because we've had to play more games, making it late into Europe and late into cups. That means more bonuses, more prize money, all these other things for players. And the fact that we had the opposite situation where we were going out of competitions prematurely in previous season may well have been one of the contributing factors to a lower wage revenue. Just really kind of diving into that area. Are we being competitive in that space or not versus our rivals effectively? But yeah, up the Spurs, guys.
Up the Spurs.